Jeremiah Tower puts a face on American cooking in the documentary The Last Magnificent. Rami Malek succumbs to Y2K hysteria in Buster's Mall Heart, and Chris Pratt and his band of a-holes are back again in Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. That's all on this edition of Movies with Mark. Hi, welcome to Movies with Mark. I am Mark McPherson, movie critic for Moviespoon.com. We're going to be taking a look at a few films that are in theaters right now, as well as movies that are streaming that you can watch right now. Well, let's get right to the first big movie of the summer, which is Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which sounds like it's the second album, even though this plays more or less as the greatest hits of the first movie. Chris Pratt reprises his role as Peter Quill, better known as Star-Lord, who has finally found his long-lost dad. And his dad happens to be Ego, a man played by Kurt Russell, who also happens to be a god whose brain resides inside a big planet. Yep, that sounds like Guardians of the Galaxy to me. Now, while Peter tries to reconnect with his dad, the other characters are busy on their own arcs. Gamora is still having a sibling rivalry with Nebula. They're still battling that out from the last movie. Rocket is still trying to find someone to connect with in this universe that he can't be a total a-hole towards. Drax seeks companionship with an empathetic alien known as Mantis. And Baby Groot, well, he's struggling to be the cutest character in the movie, which isn't too tough with his little baby shape and those big baby eyes that he's got. Now, just in case there weren't enough arcs already going, there's also a father-son arc going with Yondu and Star-Lord. There's a shifting of the guards within the Ravagers, in which Sylvester Stallone pops up. There's a race of golden beings that the Guardians work with in the beginning, and they end up chasing the Guardians across the galaxy. And, oh yeah, there's that whole romance going on with Star-Lord and Gamora, which the movie really doesn't have much time for either, but still manages to wedge in. It's surprising, this movie really doesn't have much time for anything, even at 2.5 hours. There is so much going on in this movie, and we don't have time to focus in on most of these arcs. In fact, most of the time the characters end up split up in the movie, and we forget about one arc, and we spend way too much time on one sequence, and then we shift back to the other characters, and there isn't really a lot of time to develop these really cool things. Like, I would love to see more of the father-son angle with Star-Lord and Ego trying to connect with this new power that Star-Lord has found, but we don't get much time for that. I would love to see a companionship develop between Yondu and Rocket, which is really cool. There's a really cool action sequence between the two, but all these arcs eventually have to hit this point where they start spouting out these melodramatic phrases and dialogue, and this is dialogue that, you know, considering how snappy these characters are, this is dialogue they should be making fun of. And again, like, it would work because they're trying to go for a little bit more of a darker tone here, just a little bit, to give these characters a little bit more depth. But we don't spend as much time, I think, as the movie requires to make us feel something more for them. I mean, don't get me wrong, the movie is still funny. It is a lot of fun. There are some very funny lines. Drax says some very inappropriate stuff. I love Rocket's attitude. You know, Groot is still cute with all his dancing, and he's even cuter now that he has, like, a smaller stature and a higher-pitched voice and everything. Yeah, it's all fun stuff. Yeah, if you loved the first movie, chances are you'll go in and you'll like this movie. However, if you're going in expecting anything more, I think you're going to be disappointed, because I think this film, it hits a lot of the same beats as the first film and doesn't really improve or, like, add that much to it. Like, for example, that scene at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy where Baby Groot is dancing and Drax kind of looks at him from the side like, that scene is back again too. Howard the Duck shows up again for no reason other than the fact that, well, it's Howard the Duck, and, you know, it's kind of funny when he shows up. There's a sequence where one of the characters has to smash their starship into the villain again. I mean, I got a lot of good laughs out of the film, and I like the tone and the style of the whole thing, and the characters are just infinitely likable. It's impossible not to love these characters. I just wish there was a better and more focused story to this, because this film feels completely out of balance with all these different arcs that don't really connect as well, and it just appears off at times. Like, this movie, it's so bloated that I think there's about like 5 Easter eggs in the credits, and it's not only is that, but they have time for 2 Stan Lee cameos in the movie. That's how huge this film is. And for being as big as it is, it feels like very familiar territory. So yeah, I had a lot of fun, but I don't think it really improves on the last Guardians of the Galaxy movie. So I'm going to have to give this film 3 stars. Our next film is Buster's Mall Heart, a very strange, surreal, and perplexing film that I fear is not as deep as it could have been, which really stinks because I really dug the atmosphere of this movie. Rami Malek of TV's Mr. Robot plays Buster, a man who's stuck at a night shift job at a hotel, who's struggling to provide for his family and desperately wants to live off the grid and escape the system and live on his own land and be self-sufficient, even though he really doesn't know the first thing about it. While working his night shift job, he spends his breaks watching this weird television show that warns of an incoming invasion and is scared into the Y2K hysteria from a conspiracy theorist played by DJ Qualls. Now, the more that Buster listens to DJ Qualls and watches these weird programs on television, the more he believes there's this inversion coming that's going to split the universe in two and destroy us in this weird Y2K hysteria. The film itself is set up into 3 different arcs, more or less. There's the first arc where Buster is seen as a family man. There's the second one where he's seen as a bearded weirdo who breaks into vacation homes. And there's the third where he's stuck in the ocean. And throughout the film, we're questioning, you know, what is really happening here? What is the real Buster? Is this his perspective? Is this something within his mind? Or is he really, or is the inversion real? Is he really going to have his soul split apart here? Which it actually does at one point. You get to physically see himself split into 2 different people. The film was written and directed by Sarah Adina Smith, who additionally wrote stuff like Goodbye World, in which you feel that she's trying to say something about society and rant and rave against it, but at the same time, you kind of feel like she's saying nothing at the same time, and she's like, the script is just ranting for the sake of ranting, which really stinks because I dug the tone of this movie. I dug its weird nature, its puzzling aspects of trying to question your own perspectives and, you know, how we view society and how we feel trapped. It's even actually kind of funny at some points from a very crude perspective. Like at one point, Buster starts breaking into vacation homes and starts pooping in pots, and he starts leaving drawings of the inversions on the wall, and the cops look at it and they think they're just looking at 2 buttholes. It's kind of crude, but you know, I kind of got some laughs out of it. The problem is I don't think that this really leads up to anything big. I think it kind of ends similar to how Sarah Dina Smith did her film Goodbye World, which is that just sort of builds and builds and builds, and then it just sort of ends on kind of a weird petered out moment, which really stinks because I think the film has a lot of depth, but I think it gets more shallow as it goes along. So I wish I could love this film more, but I can only admire it from more of a cosmetic standpoint and just for the altering of perspective, which I found pretty cool. So I'm gonna have to give it 2.5 stars. Our next film is Jeremiah Tower, The Last Magnificent, and I'm a little ashamed to admit that I've never actually heard of Jeremiah Tower, but that's okay because this documentary reveals how great this man was as a chef of American cuisine. The documentary follows Jeremiah Tower from his old age, where he's contemplating what he's left on in life, to his early years as a child, where he was more fascinated in food than he was in his parents, which, to be fair, his parents weren't really that interested in him either. Tower's love of food carried him through his college years, where he was more interested in cooking than what was going on with the revolution in the 60s, and then eventually it led him all the way up to the 1980s, where he launched the successful Stars restaurant, which became a hotspot for celebrities in California. Jeremiah Tower also features lots of talking head interviews from other famous chefs that can vouch for how great he is, from the likes of Wolfgang Puck and Martha Stewart, and Anthony Bourdain is big in here, especially since Bourdain is the producer of this movie and it was made by CNN Films, so of course he's going to be a big talking head in the movie. I don't think I'd ever heard of Jeremiah Tower because I think he was before my time. I mean, his Stars restaurant kind of peaked in the late 1980s and was sold off in the 90s, and he pretty much left the cooking scene for a few decades, and he only really returned in recent years so that he could be the lead chef at a small New York tavern, which, you know, he improved the food a little bit, but it didn't really impress food critics that much, and so the management wanted to have a stricter grip on his cooking, and he said, nope, screw that, I'm out. And that's kind of where Tower's story ends for the moment, which is interesting because, like, after that point we see him, you know, kind of contemplating what he's left on life and if he still has that magic as a great chef. I don't think this is a great documentary, mostly because I think, I'd never heard of Tower before, and the movie starts off with all these talking heads talking about how great he is, and we start immediately with his childhood history, and we don't really get to see much of his cooking. We mostly get to see some archival footage, and we don't get to see a lot of the food that he puts out. But I think it picks up some steam towards the end there, where we get to see him helm a tavern, where we get to see his thoughts and feelings as he's trying to deal with the management closing in on him, and how the food critics are savaging him in reviews. And I just love hearing how he deals with it, and how he views the world, and mostly how he views himself as a chef. So yeah, not a great documentary, but for someone who's never heard of Jeremiah Tower before, like myself, this was a really fascinating documentary. I was intrigued to learn more about this guy and look at his history as an American chef. So yeah, I definitely recommend it. 3 stars. And now here's a couple of recommendations for movies that are currently streaming that you can watch right now. And because I found myself so fascinated with Jeremiah Tower, I thought I'd choose 3 documentaries on Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Filmstruck this time. Currently playing on Netflix is Mifune, The Last Samurai, a documentary on the movie career of Toshiro Mifune, probably one of the most famous Japanese actors of the 20th century. Narrated by Keanu Reeves, this is an all-encompassing documentary that not only covers Mifune's life, but also covers the movie industry of Japan during the 20th century, and Akira Kurosawa, and Mifune's family. It covers a lot of ground here. I think it covers so much ground, though, in such a very short amount of time. It's a very short documentary, but I think it gives a great snapshot of why Mifune was such a great actor, and why he's worth seeking out if you love Japanese cinema. I mean, this documentary was so cool to me, because I absolutely adore Japanese cinema, that as I was watching it, I was getting, excited, because there were a couple scenes where they examine some of Mifune's scenes, and I was just like, oh man, I had to instantly go to my DVDs and pull out Yojimbo and the Seven Samurai, because I had to watch them immediately. It's that good. So yeah, if you've never heard of Toshiro Mifune, and you want a quick snapshot of his best work, this would be a great documentary to start from. And if you are familiar with his work, this is great because it expands a little bit more on his lifestyle, like how he was an alcoholic, how he was a soldier, how he gave his last meals to kamikaze pilots that were going to go off to die, and the relationship he had towards his father, and where he went with his movie career, and how he started his own production company. It's a lot of ground that covers, and it's a great documentary if you love Japanese cinema. Currently playing on Amazon Prime is One More Time with Feeling, a documentary about Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds completing their latest album, Skeleton Tree, after Nick Cave recently lost his 15-year-old son. Shot entirely in black and white, this is a very somber and sobering documentary about Nick Cave's struggle to make great music in the wake of such a horrible incident. And it's really interesting because we get to get inside Nick Cave's head, even in the moments where we're trying to imagine what he would be thinking about while they were filming this documentary. Like, he does address the camera and how odd technology is, and how he feels about his music, and how he gets frustrated with his music, and we get to hear his inner thoughts at moments where it seems most opportune. And we get to hear a lot of great music from this band. This is a great album. You get to hear a lot of powerful music through here, and we get to see shots of Nick singing the music, not only singing it, but also contemplating it while he's listening to it, which gets a little bit deeper into his psyche. So it's a very interesting documentary. It was very overlooked last year. I would definitely recommend it. And currently playing on Filmstruck is Lost in La Mancha, a documentary about Terry Gilliam's scrap Don Quixote project, about how every single thing could go wrong during filmmaking. Now, I've never been the biggest fan of Terry Gilliam's films, but I do acknowledge that he is a very talented director, and it is agonizing watching him go through trying to get this film made in this documentary, because it is insane. Everything goes wrong. The weather goes bad. There's jets in the air that screw up the audio of shots. The health of the actors is brought into question. It all just comes crumbling down. It's kind of sad, but at the same time, you got to admire Terry Gilliam's spirit for trying to make this film work. He's a very passionate filmmaker, and I think this film portrays him in such a great light that I actually have a little bit more respect for him as a director. Now here's a recap of the movies I reviewed on this program. I gave 3 stars to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I think it was a lot of fun with likable characters, but at the same time I think the script is too bloated and uneven at times. 2.5 stars for Buster's Small Heart, a perplexing, very surreal film with a lot of great ideas and themes. It's just unfortunate that it doesn't really build up to anything grand. And 3 stars for Jeremiah Tower, The Last Magnificent, an interesting and fascinating portrait on an icon of American cuisine. Remember, you can read more of my reviews at moviespoon.com and movieswithmark.com, and if you would like to support the show and see more episodes more frequently in the future, be sure to support us on Patreon. My name is Mark McPherson, and thank you for watching.